I don't know if this is going to work or not. Do you ever go to, where do y'all work? Do you ever go to your workplace and think, I don't know if this is going to work or not? But we'll give it a whirl. So, Trivial Pursuit question: what is the most famous equation in the world? Answer: E equals mc². Hands down. Easily, my quantum chemist, am I right? Easily the most, she said yes. If you're going to open with that line and you've got to literally have a quantum chemist in the congregation, whew. But I was right on that. Most famous equation in the world is E equals mc². Now, I'm not qualified to say very much about it, but I can say this much. E is energy, M is mass, and C is the speed of light. So energy equals mass multiplied by the speed of light squared. The speed of light is 186,000 miles per second. That's a big, big, big number. So one of the things that I can say about E equals mc², a lot of y'all are like, what in the heck is wrong with this guy? There's a lot wrong with me, just stay with it. One of the things that I can say about this most famous equation is that it means that a whole lot of energy can come from something really, really, really small. Anybody been around a toddler lately? That's a good, yeah, there you go. That's not a bad, is it, Rebecca? Concrete example of a lot of energy. Some of y'all are thinking, what about you? A lot of energy coming from something that is relatively small. So here's the deal. Did y'all hear Hans read the epistle, the New Testament epistle? Did you hear God is love? God is love is the E equals mc² of Christian theology. God is love. I think about it. 3 short words. You almost pass right by them. Like if I whispered them, God is love, you would just pass by. Did he just say something? 9 letters total. God is love. Little bitty words. And yet, over the course of the past 2,000 years, God is love has yielded a burst of energy that has an atomic impact. Here's what I mean. We start with the 3 little words, God is love. And then we move quickly to a few more words. Whoever loves God knows God. Can you feel the radiance building an outer orbit? Then you move on from there. The text says, whoever doesn't love God doesn't know God. Boy, we just got pretty big. Whoever doesn't love doesn't know God. And then it gets even bigger from there. This radiance from God is love grows to this. This part, I think, Bob, is meddlesome. Those who say, I love God, but can't get along with their brothers and their sisters are what? Liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot, the text says cannot, love God whom they have not seen. Oh, Lord, how did we get out there from God is love? I mean, apply the radiant energy of that teaching. If you can't get along with your brothers and your sisters, you don't love, you don't know God. Apply the radiant energy of that teaching to your life, and I promise you, it will touch every corner of your life, like it or not, and your life will become an unceasing challenge, or I like to say adventure, in loving whoever and whatever is right in front of you. And it all came from those 3 little words, 9 letters. God is love. Now, I'm all for loving everybody, and love is all. But when I feel the sort of blast of that teaching, I immediately, involuntarily, I'm not proud of this, think to myself, but aren't there any deal breakers? I mean, can't a person behave so poorly that it's a deal breaker? What happens when somebody does something just terrible, toxic, damaging? Many of you have heard this story before. And it's not just that I think that it bears repeating, it's just that it's yielding something new. We'll see what you think. 10 or 12 years ago, I became close friends with a man named Dan who had a really bad crack habit. It sounds like a funny thing to say. Any crack habit is bad. His was really, really bad. And in those days, I was hanging out with a lot of recovering drug addicts. And so this fella, Dan, wanted to quit, but he couldn't quit. So he started coming around my friends, and along the way, Dan and I became really close. Now, it was especially hard for Dan to quit, that is to get into recovery, because his dad had a lot of money. So he never lost everything and hit that hard bottom that is such a gift to a lot of addicts. Dan just finally got sick and tired of being sick and tired. So he came around my friends. And in my little orbit of friends, there was this one guy named John. And Dan met John, who had a remarkable gift, like an uncanny gift with drug addicts. You see, John had been there and done that in every imaginable way. And John helped Dan get clean and stay clean. My friend Dan used to say, "Hendree, John saved my life, no question about it." He taught me about recovery, and he walked me through the 12 steps. He said, "Hendree, when everyone else had given up on me, heck, I'd even given up on myself, John was there." And then something happened to John. I don't know, even to this day, I never have figured it out. Something happened to John. He was still present in the community, but he just kind of lost it. You ever have anybody in your life just kind of loses it? He just kind of lost it, and he turned on us. It's a very sad deal. He turned on all of us, John did, and he started a smear campaign, like a real active smear campaign that was vicious and hurtful and heartbreaking. I remember days on end just being so sad about what he was doing. One day I couldn't take it anymore. Yet another person had just come into my office at the church to tell me the latest toxic, terrible thing that John had said about me, about the church, and about all our friends. And it was the straw that broke this little camel's back. And so I got up after the person left my office. I got up and I went looking for my buddy Dan. And when I found Dan, I told him the latest gossipy, just sort of murderous thing that John had said about us. And then I said to Dan, "Dan, what are we going to do? What are we going to do?" And I'll never forget what Dan said back to me. He wasn't turned towards me. He wasn't looking at me. He had his back to me, actually. And I'll never forget this. It was this tiny, it was this little bitty, ordinary moment. See, Dan had his back to me. He just emptied the trash. And he was putting a trash bag, like an empty trash bag, back into the trash can, something we do on a weekly basis in our own homes, right? That's what he was doing. And he didn't look up at me, he just kept at it, and he said, "Hendree, what are we going to do about what?" "About John," I said. "We got to do something. What are we going to do about John?" And Dan, he had this little, like, chuckle, like this little laugh, this wise little laugh that would come out sometimes just ever so softly, and he'd laugh just so. He leaned further over to put the trash bag into the bottom of the can, and he said, "Well, Hendree, we're going to let John be John. That's what we're going to do. We're going to let John be John." And that answer blew just the top of my head, just blew the top of my head right off. Because that is the last thing that I thought he would say. I mean, the straw had broken the camel's back. I thought we were finally going to engage in a battle with John and blast that cat out of the water. It turns out, I'll be darned, we're just going to let him be. We're going to let him be. If you say you love God, but you don't love your brother no matter what, darn it, you don't love God. A couple years later, I asked Dan. A couple years later, I asked Dan about that day and that season of our lives and what he said to me. We're going to let John be John. And he said, Hendree, here's the deal. John saved my life. Nothing can ever undo that. John saved my life. Oh, sure, he acted poorly after that. Surprise, surprise. I don't know why he did. To be honest with you, brother, I don't need to know why he acted so poorly. And I said, what? And I sort of leaned in, like really sincerely. I didn't want to argue or fight with him. I really didn't understand. I said, why not? Why don't you need to know why? Doesn't he need to apologize? He said, because, you know, when you asked me that day, a couple years ago, what are we going to do? There was a little moment, he said. He said, just like a millisecond, but I could see John's whole life. And I could see in a second, I just thought about that man, this fella, John, and all that he's been through from the beginning of his life up to right then. And I see in an instant when this happens to me, he said to me, he's just one of us. Oh, he's just one of us. He's just a human going through a bad stretch, and I love him. And in true love, he said, there's no deal breakers. He said, that man saved my life. I'll never forget it. You can't undo it, and I'm never going to stop loving him. Anything he ever does to me from this day forward, he said, I'll just hold it up next to the story of all the good things he's done and let the good outweigh the bad. I just stared at him. Then I guess I just barely whispered, huh? No deal breakers. Like a question, no deal breakers. 3 little words. He heard me and he laughed, that soft little laugh that really wise people have, but I don't have it. And he said, that's right. No deal breakers. E equals mc². Really big energy coming out of something really small. God is love. There was a simple point, a sort of singularity in which who did what to whom broke down, and all Dan could see was the winding road of John's entire life, and he chose. He chose to love him anyway, to let him be. And that tiny little mass of a moment released an energy of forgiveness and love that I'm still blown away by and telling you about yet again some 15 odd years later. See, I'm reminded that the whole point of this thing, I mean, from start to finish, Alpha to Omega. Come on, baby. The whole point of this thing, life, the church, every one of your relationships, whether at work or school or home, the whole point is love. And it's hard. I don't know about y'all, but maybe it's easy for y'all. It is hard for me to be a human being called to love with no deal breakers. Can I have a cup, like a mulligan or something? Can I have like 3 deal breakers? It's hard, but it can be done. I've seen it. Actually, I've had it happen to me. I've had plenty of people love me when I messed up. No deal breakers. So here's how we'll end. Y'all ready to wind this thing down? No deal breakers. That's the true meaning of the cross. Somebody said, what at that church down there, what do they believe about the cross? That's the true meaning of the cross. Right before he died, Jesus forgave every one of his killers. He said, Father, Abba, Papa, Daddy, let's let them be. Let's not, oh God, remember this one bad day. Let's remember all that they are and all that they will be, and let them be. Let John be John. Let Betty be Betty. Let Stuart be Stuart. Let Rebecca be Rebecca. Let Peter be Peter. Let Paul be Paul. Let them all be. No deal breakers. Those 3 little words can release an enormous amount of energy, grace, and love into this big old world. I know, because I have a very warm and loving relationship with John today. I could call him on the telephone this afternoon. We would laugh. We'd probably cry a little bit. We could talk, hang up, and do it again tomorrow. And it all came, not because of me, baby. It all came from that tiny, tiny little ordinary moment when my buddy Dan pushed a black plastic bag into the bottom of a darn old trash can with a little laugh. Wow. Amen.